I talk to myself out loud all the time. And in many times, animated. So, why would you do that? Or why would I do that? I get to hear an analysis of the situation or the problem. I can hopefully see the dangerous things and maybe the opportunities at the same time for some improvement. In today's text, the preacher is talking to himself. We know that from other passages in the book, and also if you go to something like the New Living Bible, you'll find it actually says, I said to myself. But in Ecclesiastes 1:16, the preacher says, I thought to myself. And in the first verse of chapter 2, he said, I thought in my heart. So we have the preacher today talking to himself. We're at a point in Ecclesiastes in which we're about 2/3 of the way through. And today, the preacher has sort of stood back or taken back, and he's reviewing. He reviews his findings and his discoveries and his conclusions. And if I had to put in a real modern type connotation, I would say what you have here is an executive summary of the book of Ecclesiastes. For all of you that are in a position in which you write and you have to write something called an executive summary, if you look at this, it's a pretty good model of an executive summary. Well, first of all, it's not but 5 verses, so it's quite short. And it gets the point across in 5 verses, and that is just amazing. Now, in today's I went a little bit outside of the text, and I found what I'm going to call the bookends. If you're a literary person, you would say the bookends of the passage. If you're an engineer or a mathematician, you might say these are the boundaries or the boundary conditions that go along with that. But here are the bookends, and you go back to just above us there, and you look at verse 23. Look at the second sentence in verse 23, and this is the first bookend. And in that second sentence, the preacher says, I am determined to be wise, but this was beyond me. Again, if you look in the New Living Bible, it says, but it really didn't work. So we begin with the pastor admitting, or the preacher admitting, that I can be determined all I want to be wise, but it's not going to work. I can't be wise on my own. And the other bookend falls in the beginning of chapter 8. And again, it's the second sentence there. And it says, who knows the explanation of things? If you're in the ESV, it says interpretation, I think, there instead of explanation. The interpretation or the explanation of things. Now, if you go back to the first bookend, the preacher's already said, this is beyond me. So he's trying to explain these things, or he's looking for an explanation of these things, but he's already said, it's beyond me. He has to look elsewhere. A question, an explanation of things. What things? What things is he trying to explain? I'm going to give you a phrase, and it occurs twice in the passage today. And I would propose to you that here's what he's looking for. Here's what he's trying to find. And the phrase is the scheme of things. You find that phrase in 25 and 27, in which the preacher says that he is looking or trying to discover or trying to find the scheme of things. So what is the scheme of things? I'll give you some candidates. Not all of these, of course, are original with me. The scheme of things that the pastor is looking for, or I want to say pastor, the preacher, the teacher is looking for here. The scheme of things. What could that be? Maybe the intricate design of life was one that I found. The nature of human behavior is the scheme of things. That might kind of fit with some of the stuff that the preacher-teacher has found here. The pursuit of meaning in God's creation. That one fits as the scheme of things. The pursuit of meaning in God's creation. Our place in creation is one. I got that one from Bobby. That's not quite how she said that one, but why are we here? Our place in creation is the scheme of things that the pastor or the teacher here is looking for. And then one that is mostly original with me. If you've got an ESV and you look at verse 25 and you go to the endnotes, you will find that it mentions the word reality, but it doesn't really expound upon it. So as I looked at that, I thought that maybe the scheme of things is the reality of God's way. We live in a society that seems to be searching for reality. We have people that are spending time and resources to try to create a reality. I don't remember the first time that I heard it said this way, but it still kind of jumps out at me when somebody says it. When somebody says something about an alternate reality, I don't think those two words go together. If it's a reality, how could there possibly be an alternate to it? So are we, like the preacher, the teacher here, are we searching for a reality in the midst of all of the alternate realities that exist around us? With that in mind, let me read you what the preacher wrote as his executive summary. Verse 25 to the end of the chapter. There are some things in there that I want you to make sure that you see. He has things in there that he calls findings. He has things in there that he calls discoveries in there. He has a methodology associated with these, and we want to look at his methodologies in there as to how he discovered this. And there are some issues in the text for the modern reader that I want to get back to after a while. And it mostly has to do with women. Ladies, I'm on your side here when we get to that. But it has to do with women and some of the things that the preacher said concerning women in that. So here's the text. Here's what he actually said. This is from the NIV. So I chose the NIV because there's some, as our pastor has told me, there are implied words scattered through Hebrew sometimes. And you got to kind of look for them. The NIV, at least in this case, puts those words in the text. The one in particular that is put in the text in here is upright. And as you read through it in some other, in the ESV, you don't find the word upright, not in the sentence there, but we find it here in the sentence, so you get a better meaning of what upright is. So those are some of the things to listen for. So I turned my mind to understand, to investigate, and to search out wisdom and the scheme of things, to understand the stupidity of wickedness and the madness of folly. I find more bitter than death the woman who is a snare, whose heart is a trap, and whose hands are chains. The man who pleases God will escape her, but the sinner she will ensnare. Look, says the teacher, this is what I discovered. After adding one thing to another, to discover the scheme of things. But I was still searching and not finding. I found one upright man among 1,000, but not one upright woman among all of them. This only have I found. The word only is really important there. And then what he's saying, this is the only thing that I'm going to stand by. This is what I give you as the truth based upon what I have. This only have I found. God made man upright, or made mankind is what it says. Now, the man in this last verse is gender neutral in both cases. Even though it's translated mankind here, but it's got men too. This only have I found. God made mankind upright, but men have gone in search of many schemes. There's a contrast as we go through this that I want you to see. What are men searching for? Many schemes. What is the preacher searching for? The scheme of things. There is a real contrast there in the scheme of things and the many schemes that are devices of mankind. Look at the findings in verse 26. I find more bitter than death. And allow me to insert a word here that is all-encompassing. I find more bitter than death, immorality. I find more bitter than death, immorality. I think the preacher has given us an example in the woman, an outstanding example there. Comes a lot from the book of Proverbs. But he's given us an example, but what he's really saying here is the real sin here, is the real thing that's more bitter than death, is all the immorality that takes over mankind. So that's his primary finding there. How did he find it? What was his process? If you look back at the verse above it, the one that I started with, so I turned my mind to understand. So these findings are from the pastor's own wisdom. So he's turned into himself and his own ability and his own great wisdom to report these findings. What strikes me is he said, but it was beyond me. But yet he still does it. So it's a little bit of a contrast there. It's beyond me, but I still do it. But he's going to himself for these findings. There actually are 3 findings in there. I think sometimes, if you're like me, I got all involved in more bitter than death is the woman, and then I failed to look on down the page and see that he also found that the man who pleases God escapes her. So he finds that more bitter than death is immorality, but the man that pleases God can escape immorality, but the sinner is ensnared by it. So those are his 3 findings there. As he's looked around at his kingdom and he says, I find that immorality is more bitter than death. But I see that the man of God escapes, and I can see that the sinner is trapped and ensnared by that. If you want to know some idea of just what is more bitter than death, I'm going to go back to Proverbs, and it's essentially the same sort of a passage there in what it's talking about. But here's sort of a laundry list of the results of immorality. which is something the preacher and the teacher have been talking about all through Ecclesiastes, the results of the sin in the world. And here's sort of a laundry list of those as they apply to the woman. Adultery, I think, is what this one was particularly applied to, but it fits the rest of them. Proverbs 5, verse 7 through about 14. Now then, my sons, listen to me. Do not turn aside from what I say. Keep a path far from her, who is the promiscuous woman, far from her. Do not go near the door of her house. And here's the list. Lest you give your best strength to others, and your years to one who is cruel. Lest strangers feast on your wealth, and your toils enrich another man's house. At the end of your life you will groan when your flesh and your body are spent, and you will say, how I hated discipline, how my heart spurned correction. I would not obey my teachers or listen to my instructors, and I have come to the brink of utter ruin in the midst of the whole assembly. What a laundry list of things that will happen. You can see from that this idea of immorality, and Solomon's a good one to describe it, is generational. I mean, when you look at Solomon's family, when you look at his life, when you look at his kingdom, and you can see that he's got some outstanding examples here that he can look at and say these things. More bitter than death is immorality. A man who pleases God can escape that, but the sinner is ensnared. And then you go to verse 27, and he has something that he calls the discoveries. There is a distinction between the findings and the discoveries, and it took me a while to decide what I thought that might be. But in the discoveries, he's actually tried to do some analytics. He's tried to quantify what he saw. And when he tries to quantify, then here's what he discovers. He says, look, says the teacher, this is what I discovered. By adding one thing to another to discover the scheme of things. And then he admits, while I was still searching but not finding, I found one upright man among 1,000, and no upright women among them. Now, I don't know whether he looked at 1,000 women or not. He probably looked at 1,000 men. Whether there's 1,000 women associated with 1,000 men may be called into question there. But he at least looked at 1,000 men, and he said, I only found one, and that was upright. And all the women associated with that, I didn't even find one at all in that. So the process is the mathematics. He has gone from his own wisdom. In my own mind, I search through my mind, and this is what I find. But now he's gone to the analytics, and he says, I'm going to do some arithmetic and see what I find. And he's adding one thing to another, and I think it may be the ESV that says, to find the sum. And when he finds the sum, this is what he finds in the sum. I take real issue with the New Living Bible here. And that the New Living Bible puts this in far too modern a way. The New Living Bible says, I found 0.1% out of 1,000 men that I interviewed. I don't think he did that. No, he didn't. He's observing, and I'm going to talk a minute about what he's observing. But he's observing. He's not doing statistics. Statistics actually begin to materialize and to be worth something in the late 1600s. And these were some guys that were working on make sure I say this, I'm looking at Bobby, the charts that the insurance companies use, the actuaries. The actuaries. People were working on the actuaries, which the actuaries is the chart that the insurance company uses to bet on when you're going to die. If I just told them how old I was and what diseases I have and a little bit of my family history, they're going to come back and tell me with pretty good idea if I'm going to live another year or not. Solomon didn't know that, and the preacher, teacher, the writer, he didn't know. He wasn't capable of doing that. So, I'm not saying that they couldn't. They can certainly count. They can certainly do proportions. We were in the book of Numbers a while back, and it begins and ends with a census, and they counted the fighting men to the nearest one person. So they know how to do that sort of a thing. But to be able to look at that and say that I found 1/10 of 1% in all these people that I interviewed, so therefore this is my conclusion. There's a conclusion here that I don't want you to reach. Don't want you to reach. There's just not enough evidence there to say, when I first read that, I look at that and I said, oh, yes, men are more holy than women. by 1 in 1,000? I don't think so. Men are more holy than women, or the opposite of that is that men are less holier, that women are less holier. Don't reach that conclusion. That's not what he meant. But what did he mean? But what did he mean as he looks at that? What he's putting to you is that this is a rare event. It is rare to go look in the community out here and find an upright man or an upright woman. When I just go through and just sort of take a casual look at it and count them, I don't find but one. And honestly, you don't find but 1 in 2,000 if you do all of that arithmetic in there. So he's saying that this is a really rare thing. And I guess the thought that came to me, and the one that I would pass on to you, where do you fit in that? Are you 1 in 1,000? If the preacher came through this community and did his little census thing, would you be the 1 in 1,000? It's rare. It's just rare to find someone who, I'll allude to it in a minute, it's rare to find someone who loves God and keeps his commandments. So he's saying that this is very rare, not a statistical analysis. The problem in the text with the women, Solomon's sort of, he's picking on them there. Whatever you want to say. As you look at that, remember, we're 950 or so BC here? The attitude toward women, just put that into the mix there as you look at that. If you go back to 1 Kings 3, is where you find that Solomon had 700 wives and 300 concubines. Well, just think about that, and you just say, well, to Solomon, women were a commodity. It's almost like he's counting his cows or something when he's out counting his women. So that attitude, I think, might bleed into that a little bit. There is a prejudice there toward women that comes out, that we're sort of getting over that now. I think the women weren't even counted in that census that I talked about a while ago. They weren't valuable enough to put it in there. That was a census of the fighting men. It didn't include the fighting women, but I never quite understood that. But they leave the women out. And I would say to you here that what he has given you here are examples, not necessarily proofs. This is an example of the immoral lifestyle. This is an example of how rare someone that loves God and keeps his commandments is. So these are the examples that are there. And now to his conclusion, as I said a while ago, verse 29. This only have I found. Out of all the stuff that he looked at and he quantified and he talked about, this is what his findings were. Since this is an executive summary, this is his preliminary conclusion. The pastor's going to be there in a couple of months, but you find the real conclusion in the last 2 verses. of Ecclesiastes. I've already quoted it a couple of times. Somebody that loves God and keeps His commandments. We're, as I said, we're 2/3 of the way through the book. The next third is spent sort of making sense of what he has seen. So don't miss the last third here. He's going to do his best to make sense of it. But this verse 29 is a bridge that takes you over to there, takes you through to the conclusion that he reaches. It also gives you a challenge. This only have I found, God made man upright. When Brian spoke to us on the 3rd chapter of Ecclesiastes, that beautiful poem about time and all the things that are in there. Time. When he gets to the end of that and sort of wraps that up, he gets down there and there's a phrase that just jumped out at me when he said that. God has put eternity in the heart of man. The preacher is saying it a little different way here. Upright. God has put eternity in your heart. A sense of God's presence in the world around you, but also in your personal life. Eternity is there. The knowledge, the presence, the ability to know God is there. And the preacher says that's the way God made us, but then he went on to say, but we have turned or gone in search of many schemes. I was working at a company years ago when we first started a lot of total quality management or something like that it was. And everybody needed to have a mission statement at that time. There was a great lesson in this, in that the management went to all of the employees. So you want to always be careful what you ask your employees or what you ask young children, because they're going to tell you. But they went to all of the employees and anonymously asked for suggestions for our mission statement. Want to guess at what won out here? More, faster, cheaper. What is more, faster, cheaper? The schemes of man. As we look at this and we see the scheme of things that God has, His plan, and then we look at the schemes of man, and what is man looking for? I want more, I want it faster, and I want it done cheaper. Now, whether that applies to a piston ring or whether that applies to a light bulb or whatever else, don't let that apply to us in our life. Maybe you can make light. Well, we don't use light. Well, we use the LEDs. Maybe we can make LEDs more faster and cheaper. But I don't know that we're going to make the upright man more faster and cheaper. As we've said many times, salvation is a process. You're saved, and we're going to go closer to God as we mature. More and more like Him, so that the purpose way out here somewhere is to reflect Him in our lives. And this is what I think the pastor is putting across to us in this wonderful ending here. I will close with Proverbs again. And this is Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. And I learned this several decades ago, those two verses, as a part of a children's musical. And here's those two verses as they were put to music. I'm not going to sing it, but the tune's stuck in my brain too. I could, but yeah, Bobby's snickering. Yeah, the tune's stuck in my brain out of this little musical here. But I think that when we look to the upright man and we say, what makes the upright man? Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not unto your own understanding. Acknowledge Him in all your ways, and He will direct your paths. A wonderful, wonderful contrast there in the scheme of things. And what we see here, again, not original with me, I found it, but it's beautiful. It says about this last verse and about the Proverbs. What you find there is the profound simplicity of God's way, as opposed to many schemes. Stay with us. The pastor is going to pick up from there. He's going to review what we've done so far, and then we're going to go to the end of the book and try to make it all make sense as we go through the rest of it. Pray with me. Thank you, Lord. Thank you most of all for the profound simplicity of your way. But even more than it exists, thanks, but thanks that we can understand it, that we can be a part of it. We're going to be like the preacher all of our life. The total suitable explanation is beyond us. But at the same time, as children of God, help us to be getting closer and closer and closer to that as we go through this part of your plan. Thank you for your word. A long time ago, hard to understand, but still a message for the heart of the child of God today. In Jesus' name.